Hello and welcome to the fourth day of Future Law Virtual Summit 2020. And we are opening up the Data Surveillance and Privacy Lab yet again. This time we're going to be having data privacy design and strategy led by Rishi Maharaj, who is the founder and executive director, if I'm not mistaken, of the Equigo. So Rishi, here you go.
All right, well, thank you very much, Anya, for today's lab and for allowing me the opportunity to do today's lab. What I'm proposed to do is that I'm going to do a presentation about 40 minutes or so. I think we have from now until 2 p.m. my time, which is about, I guess, 8 p.m., depending on the time zone you're in. So good morning, good afternoon, and good night to who's ever on this call with us. Obviously, we transcend time zone, but that's the power of technology, right? We're able to now interact via different time zones and get different perspectives. That's great. So I'm going to spend roughly about 40 minutes going through a PowerPoint about understanding how we now implement privacy into our organizations, because we hear a lot about just this morning, I facilitated a discussion with Dr. Ann Kavukian on privacy by design. We know there are a lot of laws out there now, privacy related, GDPR in the EU, CCPA in California, other countries like India, Pakistan, South Africa, Brazil, either revising existing laws that they have to be GDPR, but with all these laws from an organizational perspective, whether you're a business sector organization, profit for profit, not for profit, we're all collecting data on clients, on customers, on stakeholders that we work with. So how do we now relate those laws into practice? How do we now implement data protection within our organization? So that's the first part of this session would be to do that. And then we open it up to discussion. Although Anya had an interesting suggestion that we probably use future law as a case study possibly, and how do we now implement what I've said, or most of what I've said, into future law, into any organization. So it's, I want this to be as interactive as possible. It's not much of a teaching, but provide knowledge, and then let's see how we can now implement this. So allow me now to share my screen. Let me know if you are seeing. Right, are you seeing my screen?
Yep, you're fine.
Yep, perfect, good. So again, so it's about data privacy, design, and strategy. And I started off this quote with a talk I did, I think, yesterday morning. I think it's always an apt quote. I love this quote by Warren Buffett. I think it's very pertinent to the times we live in. It takes 20 years to build a reputation. From reputation, I mean organizational reputation, individual reputation of ourselves, and everything else that we try to do and instill. So when people think of you, they associate certain things with you, and that takes time to build. However, in the world we live in, he says 5 minutes. At the time this quote was taken, it can now be less than 5 minutes. A tweet, a viral post, or anything on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever social media platforms are out there. One breach that comes into your organization via ransomware or virus or malware, whatever it may be, and that whole reputation goes up in smoke. It can be ruined very quickly. So the digital economy, we all agree, we're now becoming more interconnected day by day, minute by minute, second by second. I mean, right now we're all in different time zones and we're able to interact so effectively during this 4-day symposium. So there are different things that are allowing us. Digital assets are now expanding. Your own vehicles now are connected to the internet. They can track where you're driving, geolocate you, everything. Manufacturing, marketplace, smart cities are now becoming developed, and governments are now implementing smart city ideas within different spheres to be able to, understand what the citizens are up to and to be able to tailor-made specific goods and service towards them. So data is exploding. It's now becoming a digital estate out there. And I got this interesting diagram from a study done by Deloitte, and it more or less lets you know as a consumer the abundance of personal data that you reveal out there daily, and it's a lot. Media preferences, politics, personal identifiers. Those are the ones that are on, well, it's my left, so those are green are the ones that you control. And then the ones that are in blue are the ones that you minimally have user control over. So in terms of educational history, family details, career, politics, these things that you normally would give out. And then things you have minimal control over, maybe payment processing, healthcare insurance, identifiers, login credentials, prescriptions, health data, legal records. It's a lot. So we leave a lot of digital footprint everywhere we go, not only by the data that we genuinely put out or genuinely give out, but by the metadata or the data about data that goes in the backend that flows with that data. So you may probably log on to a site, sign in with your username, passwords, may have give them your email address, your telephone contact, your address. But behind that, there's certain metadata that comes behind that that you don't physically are aware that you give out. Bill Schneider talks about the exhaust that comes out, and those exhausts are now becoming powerful tools by organizations as part of their AI analytics to be able to tailor made or to do certain kind of assessments about you. What does data mean for the 21st century organization? I mean, data is important. Data is critical. You can't make information or you can't make decisions without data. So it helps you make better decisions. It helps you solve problems. It helps you understand what's going on, what went wrong, how do we better, make adjustments to make it better. It helps you understand performance, what's working well, what's not working well, why is it not working well. It helps you understand your customers, your consumers, your clients, whoever it may be, what are their likes, what are their dislikes, what's going on within them that you can do to make it better for them. So I mean, data is valuable any way we take it. And data is now given rise to a new economy. You've often heard people say data is the new oil. Um, I don't like to think of it as that. I like to think of it, I mean, there was this famous quote, I can't remember the guy who said it a while back, in which he said it's not really the new oil, but a soil. If you think of soil, is where you plant things in and you grow and you get different things. So if you have a place where you plant, crops or whatever, you have different seeds. It all goes into the same soil, but you get different results coming out of it, be it fruits, vegetables, or be it sorry, yeah, or be it plants, flowers, herbs, whatever it may be. So data is really a soil in which you can now grow different things for your organization. What does data mean for the 21st century organization? Consumers are now becoming a lot more aware of their rights and exactly of what's going on in the world around them. And I think the real explosion in this, for me personally, although data privacy is not a new thing, data protection is not a new thing. It's been around for years since at least again, I think the first data protection law came about in the 1960s or 70s and stuff like that, but it's been debated for years. Even the US Supreme Court dealt with it way back in the 1800s. The whole idea of privacy. That's when they first got these snap cameras where you can take out physical pictures of people and stuff like that. So privacy is not a new concept. But I think people have begun over the last, I would say, 5 years to take it on a lot more seriously. And I attribute that more or less to the elections in the US and the Facebook Cambridge Analytica, I call it scandal, you can call it problems, whatever you want to call it. But I think that really drove it home for some people with regards to the impact that companies that collect their data is having on them and other people who are collecting this data from a company that you gave it to and using it to manipulate what you do, what you say, how you go about doing things. So I think consumers and citizens on the whole are now becoming a lot more aware of their rights and of what personal data companies collect on them, and how that they are now embracing the whole idea of accountability and transparency, and they're not unwilling to leave your organization if you heard that right and you use it maliciously. So consumers are now becoming a lot more savvy and a lot more aware of these things. And data privacy has now evolved from well, okay, I'll kind of do it. I'll kind of put some things in place, put a statement there that nobody reads and I'm okay and I'm covered. It's now becoming a must have for organizations, for your boardrooms, in both NGOs, civil society organizations, and for-profit organizations, and for government, in terms of it being critical for you in order to, one, comply with laws that are out there, two, endanger trust within the clients and the stakeholders that you deal with, and three, it also helps with regards to putting proper security systems in place to ensure that you aren't breached. So it's really now becoming a key imperative, I think, for organizations. And of course, this comes out of a study that was actually done by Cisco, and it came out in 2020. And what Cisco noticed as part of return on investment, because obviously every business wants to know, if I'm going to invest money in this, what does it mean to me? How do I recoup my investment? And Cisco, in their study, which looked at companies and surveys from companies, and I think they looked at the OECD countries in particular, what they saw was that the average spend in companies that invested in privacy program, I think, was $1.2 million or something like that. But they actually saw that those companies that invested in privacy programs or put systems in place from a privacy perspective actually saw a return on investment. So for every $1 they invested, they saw a return of $2.70. So you saw, money coming back in because of the investment in uh, privacy and investing in tools that could help you manage the personal data that you collect. So what exactly is data protection? What exactly is data privacy? Some people say, well, we have privacy, we have security. We've always had security. We have data security. So that should be enough. I have security. I don't need to worry about privacy. Well, for me, there are two distinct things. So data security obviously is protecting data once you've got it. Who can access it? Who can't access it? Preventing breaches from happening and stuff like that. Privacy is a lot more different. It dictates how you collect the data. Do you have consent to collect the data? Do you have a lawful reason for collecting the data? Who uses the data within the organization? Who do we share the data with? So do we share it with third parties? Do we transfer it over using cloud service providers to be able to transfer data to be processed or secured in the cloud? How long do we use the data for? How do we get rid of the data after we finish with it? So data privacy really looks at the life cycle of data from the time you've collected to the time you no longer need it and you destroy it. And security obviously plays a part in protecting it once you've collected it and you have it within your organization. So for me, they are both crucial. I think Dr. Kavokian made the point this morning in her discussion. It's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not one versus the other. You have to choose between privacy or security. You can have both. So she looks at it from a positive sum perspective, that we can have both data privacy and security within our organization, and they can live harmoniously together. So it's not about one versus the other, but about them working together to create a bulletproof program within your organization. Right? So, and data protection, again, it's about safeguarding your fundamental right to privacy. And Dr. Kevorkian says it's about you having control over your data and you having control with whoever you share it with, who you want to give it to. She made the point this morning, and I think it's a valuable point. She doesn't care. If you want to give her your information and give everything out to people, that's fine, but that's your choice, and that it must be a choice. It must not be something that's coerced upon you that you have to do, but you need to have your choice and your right to be able to decide what you do and how you share your data and how you give your data and who you give your data to. And you also have a right to ensure that those who you entrust your data to are using it for the proper reasons that they collected it for, and nothing more. If any other things need to be used for it, they need to come back to you and communicate to you, and you need to give additional consent for that. So this is my basic snippet of what data protection is. For me, it's the right to protection from unreasonable intrusion. So unreasonable. So we all know to interact in day-to-day life, you have to give up some level of data about yourself. If you apply for a credit card, if you apply for a new phone, if you want to sign up to a new account to do certain things, you have to give up certain data. But what you do expect is that there would be no unreasonable intrusion except for what you gave the data up for, so that there's no other use of the data without your explicit consent. So you should have a reasonable expectation of privacy from the data you will have given out. That's only used for that purpose that you presented it to the organization and no more. And if anything else has to become of it to be used for it, that you get consent from the data subject to be able to use the data elsewhere. So what are 7 questions that organizations should be asking themselves? One should be, do you know where your data lives? Have you ever mapped out your data? From the time you've collected it, where does it go to? Who has access to it? And by data, I should emphasize here, I'm talking about not only electronic data, but also hard copy data, because we still have organizations who work in a hard copy environment. You may collect it electronically, but you may also still copy it or print it out and then use it. So it's not about electronic data alone, it's about data holistically, either electronically or paper-based or any other format. Do you know how it moves through your organization? Do you know who collects it, who uses it? Just recently, I'm working on a project with a company right now, and we actually did a data mapping exercise. And when I showed them their data map in a diagram format, they were like, wow, we didn't know we used so much data. Or two, we didn't know that we had so much duplication of the same kind of data in different parts of our organization. So there's duplication of data within the organization. So, where does your data live? Who has access to your data internally, externally? You know, with internally, if you have businesses and different sections that have to use this data, is anybody else out of that section has access to it? If you're sharing the data across territorial borders, do you know who has access to it? Are you sure exactly what they're doing with it? Data minimization is point 3. What personal data is necessary to do your work? Do you need to collect everything? Sometimes you fill out information for certain things and you wonder, why do they want all of this information? Why don't they just take, A, B, C, and D? Why do they want to know everything else? We have a saying here in my country, in Trinidad, that sometimes they want to know everything down to your blood type. And interestingly, we actually had that recently where my children are at home, schooling from home, and the ministry put out a request for information from the school for pupils, and we had to fill out this information. And some of the information the ministry was asking for was the child's blood type, their religion, their ethnicity. And my privacy, I had went up automatically, and I actually wrote to the ministry saying, wait, why are you asking for all this information? Is this too excessive? Data minimization. How is this going to help my child get a better education during this time? So again, data minimization, to collect only what you need. What are the consequences if your personal data is compromised? And we'll talk about that a little bit later, the whole idea of DPIAs, data privacy impact assessment. What happens if your data is compromised? And again, this interesting fact that 63% of consumers say that, I'll do business elsewhere. Would you do business with an organization or with a company in which you have had a data breach and you didn't know about it? And people came and they didn't tell you afterwards that there was a data breach, the information was compromised. We saw share prices fall drastically for like Target and Facebook when they had their own data breaches or scandals. So again, what are the consequences if there's a data breach and personal information goes out? What are you a potential target for data breach? Again, linked to data minimization. Most organizations believe the more data I collect, the better for me. The more data you collect, also it's better for a hacker, somebody outside, because now you have a trove of information. So it's not always good to collect a lot of information, because the more information you collect means you have to put more systems in place to be able to protect that information. And from an organization point of view, that means more cost. And you become more attractive to hackers, to anybody out there who wants to get in and target your data. Are we ready to provide evidence of compliance to regulators if you're in a company or country that has a regulation or regulation coming on stream too? Do you have things in place? Don't wait until the law comes in to be able to do that. You need to do it now. And then I think this point 7 here goes to the current situation in COVID-19, in that what are our plans for adopting new technologies and analytics in sync with global emerging privacy regulations? COVID-19 has forced digital transformation to expand greatly in organizations. A lot of people who weren't online are now going online. A lot of people who didn't have apps before are now seeing the value of apps. There's a great meme I saw going around a while back saying, what was the biggest cause of your organization becoming digitally transformed? CISO, CEO, or COVID-19? And everything was ticked under COVID-19 because it's forcing you now to change. But in doing that change and becoming digitally compliant and becoming enhancing and using digital tools, are you aware of the best practice with regards to global privacy that exists out there? Because there are now standards also, they're not only laws. ISO, I think in late last year, came up with a new privacy information security management system, ISO 27701. And so it's now becoming standards that exist out there that you need to be compliant with the best standards and the global privacy best practice. So you need to be aware of these things as you improve and try to develop new systems and processes and technologies. So again, why is data privacy or data protection important for business? I don't think anybody, any organization, any consumer would ever want to wake up in the morning and see this headline in the papers or on a tweet or in Facebook or on the news or anything like that there's been a hack, there's been a cyber attack on your local branch, on your local bank, your insurance company, or a company that you do business with, and that personal information is now out there. Because for me personally, I guess I would feel embarrassed or may feel afraid knowing what personal information is out there on me that somebody now has access to, and I may now have to take other measures. And if from a business point of view, you don't want to wake up in the morning and see this, because obviously the alarm bells start to go off as to exactly what, what things that we need to do in place now, being reactive rather than being proactive. And there are a lot of impacts on any organization, regulatory, legal, depending on the country that you operate in and the laws. You may have to pay heavy fines. We saw where Facebook and Google and a lot of companies in the EU have been fined heavily by the regulators there for breaching of data protection laws. It impacts your brand name. And by impacting your brand name that you've taken so long, like Warren Buffett said, 20 plus years or so to develop and to create and to niche, because of that hurt to your brand name, it also has financial losses. Share prices may drop. One study, I think in 2017 says because of data breaches, companies could experience between 5 to 7% or 8% share price drop, which could be in the billions of dollars. Also financial, because consumers may not want to do business with you. Potential partnership deals may not want to do business with you because of this. There are also domestic and international, things that can impact on your business and the way you're perceived out there internationally. So there are business risks to too much data, and I mentioned this a bit before, so I won't go too much into detail in this slide, but basically to say, just because you collect a lot of data and you say, okay, the more data we have, the better, the more data we have also creates a lot more risk to the organization. So you need to be acutely aware of exactly what our needs are at this particular point in time to be able to do whatever service we're providing to our customers and our clients. So there are business risks that are involved with regards to personal data that you need to be aware of and put things in place to be able to manage that and mitigate against that. And privacy programs bring value for me. It brings value because compliance, it brings value because you understand how your data flows. It brings value because you're able now to prevent breaches within your organization. It improves your brand value. It maintains investor and customer trust. You build customer loyalty. You can engage in partnerships. So having a data protection program, and the study done by Cisco in 2019, I think shows that there is value for businesses out there to invest in data protection programs within your organization. So it's good for strategy. It's good for the business holistically. So I've talked about, what data protection is, the value of it for businesses, the value of it for organizations. But let's talk the nitty-gritty now. Most people, when you talk, they ask you, well, okay, I understand the law. I understand I need to do these things. What are some steps do I now need to take to really get this done in my organization? And again, this touches a whole sphere of organization. It's not just for-profit organizations. For-profit, NGOs, schools, healthcare facilities, government, you name it, tech companies, everybody is involved these days, some form of fashion of collecting personal data on clients, on customers, and on employees, because your employees were part of the organization, you also collect personal data on them. So it's not just customers and clients, but the employees. So how do we really go about, taking these nice ideas of privacy by design, these nice ideas of GDPR and things? What are some of the steps we can take practically? So I've come up with a 10-step model for data protection and compliance, based on everything I've seen, all the best practices I've read, and I've been looking at this for a very long time, since 2009 or thereabouts. I've been involved with data protection, some form or the other. When I worked in my country, it actually fell on my lap to finalize and get our Data Protection Act passed through Parliament and implemented. So I've been acutely aware of and looking at the landscape of data protection for a very long time. And based on that, these are just my 10-step ideas as to things that you can do now to implement. So this is the 10-step chain, as I mentioned it. And the first step is buy-in from the top. You need to have that champion within the organization to be able to champion this. It needs to have that executive buy-in within the organization, either your CEO, your board of directors, your CISO, if you have a chief privacy officer, whoever it may be, but it needs to be that executive support from the top. Because I've seen so often where you have people who are exposed to privacy, realize the importance of it for the organization, but they don't have that executive will to be able to say, this is the direction that we're going to. So there needs to be accountability from the top down, there needs to be buy-in, and there needs to be support. They need to be your change agents in dealing with putting together proper data protection or data privacy systems within your organization, right? Two, you need to appoint a point person or a team. Most legislations have within it that you need to appoint a DPO, which is a data protection officer, or a privacy officer. I know in the US, for example, they use the term privacy officer or CPO, chief privacy officer. But you need to have that point person. And most laws that have a DPO, that data protection officer or privacy officer is your direct point of contact between the organization and the regulator. So they're like the middleman between the organization and the regulator to make sure the organization stays compliant with whatever practices are going on. But for me personally, I think even if you have a DPO within the organization or privacy officer, there also needs to be a team involved. It's a team effort. The fascinating thing for me about data protection or privacy is that it's not it cuts across all avenues of the organization. It touches legal compliance, because you obviously will have to comply with laws and regulations. It touches IT, because a lot of companies are now becoming IT based. So it touches IT in terms of security and access controls and sharing, encryption, all those different things. It touches your marketing. If you have to do third-party marketing to customers and stuff like that, to ensure you have consent and everything. It touches your front-end staff, your customer service, or people who deal with your clients on a day-to-day basis to understand exactly how we go about ensuring that we comply with data protection in terms of the way we collect the data from the client to the customer. It touches on your different departments that may work with some aspects of data protection, the personal data, in terms of accessing it, going through it, and then from it designing goods and services to be able to give to a particular client. It touches on HR, because like I said, it's also about your employees, because you collect a lot of employee data, salaries, health data, and other things, financial data on employees. It also touches HR in the way that HR puts proper things in place to manage how we deal with employee data. So it's a wide ambit. So as far as possible, even if you have a DPO or you're supposed to have a DPO, by law, I would always advocate for having a privacy team in place, because it's really cross-cutting across the organization holistically. Right. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the whole idea of KYC. If you're in the realm of familiar with anti-money laundering or financing terrorism and stuff like that, they have these things called KYC that you have to fill out to know your customer. Well, I've come up with my own acronym called KYD, Know Your Data. Do you know your data? And I have something called here the 5 W's of knowing your data. Uh, 5 W's, and this I got from the Information Commission, I think, uh, of the Isle of Man, in that they had a very interesting take on it. So for them, the 5 W's were: why is personal data processed? Why do you collect it? Do you have a legal reason for collecting that personal data? Right? And these are some of the examples of the personal data that you may collect. Whose data is being processed? We have staff, we have clients, relative guardians, you have business contracts, you have suppliers, children, offenders, suspects, and stuff like that. So whose data are we processing? What type of data is being processed? You process different types of data: personal data, financial data, health data, ID card data, passport, driver's license, national identification card, criminal convictions, if you're within the realm of people, to ensure if they had a previous conviction or not, biometric information, your fingerprint, your DNA, education, employment. So what type of data are you processing? When is the data being processed within the organization? Is it from the time the information is collected, or is it stored somewhere and then processed afterwards? Is it stored offsite, on-site? Where is it processed? Is it processed manually on location? Is it stored offsite in the cloud and then you have to access it? We have a lot of people now working remotely. So are people going to be accessing databases and different things from home? What are security systems involved in that to be able to access it? Do you have secure VPNs and encryption to be able to get in to access it? So those are your 5 W's of knowing your data. Then know your legal compliance requirements. Each country is different. Different countries have different laws. From what I've seen now, most countries are using GDPR as the foundation for passing the different laws, but still you see different changes and adjustments in the law based on what your individual country has in place. I'll give you an example here in the Caribbean. Uh, just last year we had Barbados pass their Data Protection Act, and then this year in May, Jamaica passed their Data Protection Act. Both countries are based on GDPR, but both bills or both acts are slightly different in terms of how do you operationalize the act. So you need to know your legal requirements. You need to know your particular country that you're operating in, or countries that you want to operate in the future. So if you want to provide services outside your country to other countries, you need to know what's the laws of those particular countries for those particular people, so that you can now know your legal requirements and adjust your program to suit. Step 5 is to analyze your risk, right? It's a risk-based approach. Most laws now talk about doing what we call a DPIA, which is a data protection impact assessment. So if you're going to be developing new systems and processes to process information, or it's also recommended if you have legacy systems in place, that it's good to do a DPIA, or a data protection impact assessment. So what is a data protection impact assessment? It's a little different from a normal risk analysis. Normal risk, if you're from the organization, normal risk will tell you that we look at the risk to the organization. What's the risk to me as an organization or business in doing this? A DPIA is a little bit different. In DPIA, you switch your focus. Your focus within a DPIA now is not so much on the organization. You still touch on the organization, but more emphasis now is placed on your data subject, on your customer, on your client. What's the risk to the client or to the customer if we get breached or this data goes out there? What's the risk to them? What's the harm that could happen to them? And then based on understanding what the harm is that could happen to them, what systems do we have in place to be able to mitigate these risks? Or if we don't have systems to mitigate these risks, what are some of the things you need to put in place now to be able to mitigate these risks that they can happen? You could never be 100% risk secure. Anybody will tell you that. But it's about knowing and understanding what your risks are upfront if you're doing new projects or starting new types of IT systems that are going to be processing data. And by processing, we mean collecting, storing, using some way, form, or fashion. It's a wide description of what we mean by processing. So if we're now going to be processing data, what's the risk? First of all, be for me, what personal data do we collect? Do we collect personal data in this processing? Yes, no. If yes, what type of data do we collect? How does the data flow? And then what are the risks to the individuals if this data is compromised one way or the other? And then what mitigating factors do we have in place or do we need to put in place to be able to manage that risk? So analyzing your risk is very, very important. 6, policy. Having a data protection policy. I want to emphasize that is for me, or normally you'll go on websites and you'll see little cookies things coming up saying this is our cookie policy, this is our privacy notice, our privacy statement. That's good. That's your external facing statement. So that's your statement to me as a customer to know what data is being collected, how you generally use data, how you generally share data, and what are my rights, and if I need to exercise my rights, who do I contact? That's your privacy statement, privacy notice. That's external facing. But also within the organization, you need to have internal policies within the organization to govern how we actually use this data and deal with this data. So those are policies that maybe deal with policy retention, a data retention policy, a holistic data protection policy, how we deal with data protection within the organization, what are our principles, a data sharing policy, a data transfer policy if you're transferring data to different processors and outside the country and stuff like that, or if you're sharing data within the organization, but that organization may be in different countries or different parts of the world. So your internal policies are important, and to go with internal policies, you must also have processes. Understand the processes, map out the processes, and the processes will come out of the policies to be able to understand exactly what are we doing. And for this, privacy by design, which is what Dr. Kavukian talks about, I think is really great, in which it talks about being proactive rather than reactive. So build privacy by default into your organization, to everything that you do, so that people know that this is what you stand for, instead of making it an afterthought. And after you've designed the systems and everything, then you're like, oh, right, are we processing personal data here? Should we have done something else different? And then you have more costs coming on in the back end. So be proactive rather than reactive, right? Also, if you have a breach, breaches are also important in that breaches do happen and could happen. And I think I saw a report recently where during this COVID-19 time, there's been an uptick in breaches happening within organizations. Do you have a breach incident report strategy in place? Some laws state that once from the time you've been subject to a breach and it impacts personal data, you have to report to the regulator and to your data subject within a time frame. I think GDPR is 72 hours. Some countries have different time frames. So establish a process. And for me, I like the acronym CARE in terms of some of the steps you need to take. CARE. C, contain the breach. A, assess the risk. What kinds of data were impacted? R, report the incident. And then E, evaluate the response and what you need to do now to make it better. So having a proper breach incident report plan or management strategy is important, because managing a breach is not only an IT problem, it's a legal problem. If you have regulatory compliance, it's a communication problem, a marketing problem, because your I wouldn't say enemies, but your rivals may use it as an opportunity to say, listen, they had a breach, they can't protect your data, come do business with me. So it's also a marketing communication problem, a IT problem, a legal problem. It may also be a training problem. We need to go now and see where your problems lie and retrain. And as you mentioned, training, that's the 8th step, training and awareness. The laws as written now and the interpretation of the laws privacy compliant, perfect. No, it's about doing and not being seen to be done. So it's about training and awareness, training your staff, becoming aware of what's going on and everything like that. Can you all still see me or hear me? I just saw a note pop up on stable. Good, perfect.
Yeah, you cut out for a bit, but it's fine now.
Yeah, because I'm on my phone still. I didn't transfer over. I'll transfer over soon. Step 9, which is being blocked now by my faces. Here we go. Step 9, monitor, have metrics, KPIs. You need to now have proper metrics in place to be able to monitor that your privacy program is working effectively. And there are several frameworks out there that exist that you can use that have controls within them that you can now use. I think AICPA, GAPP, which is the General Accepted Privacy Principles. We have a lot of ISO standards. I think ISO 2900 or thereabouts deals with privacy principles and control mechanisms. So there are several frameworks that exist out there that you can use to develop controls. And within those controls, you can monitor what's going on, what's happening, because you need to consistently monitor because technology is changing, law is changing, the landscape changes quickly. I mean, just a quick point, people doing business between the EU and the US in January would not have thought that by July, the Privacy Shield agreement between the EU and the US would have been deemed illegal and therefore harm transfers of data from the EU to the US. So this changes regularly. So you have to be monitoring your program, monitoring what's happening out there, and make adjustments to that. And then audit. You need to audit your program as often as possible by third-party auditors. And all other companies now do audits of organizational programs. So very quickly, bottom line, privacy should be viewed for me as a business issue and not a compliance issue. You need to think strategically about transforming privacy into a competitive business advantage. I took this slide from Dr. Kavokian's slide she did earlier on today. I think it's so much, it speaks volumes. The cost of taking a proactive approach versus the cost of taking a reactive approach. You decide which one you want to do. Spend a little now and save in the future, or spend not anything now and then in the future be faced with different costs that could affect the organization going forward. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to present this to you today. I hope it was valuable in some way, form, or fashion. I know it's a lot to take in when I do these sessions, so I normally end with this nice, simple statement. Take a breath. Yes, it's a lot, but I think at the end of the day, we all could agree that the way our personal data is handled by organizations, by government, by anybody is important. And we need to ensure that we take steps to ensure they are compliant. And for organizations, we need to be aware of our customers are our lifeline. Without our customers, we won't be in business. So we need to treat our customers' data with value. It is a business asset now that needs to be managed properly. So just take a deep breath, relax, and start the journey. So I thank you very much for that opportunity today.
Thank you so much, Rishi. That was quite incredible. I mean, extensive and very informative, at least on my end. I do have a question though, because you compared it to, I mean, you said at the end that it shouldn't be a compliance issue, but it should be a business issue, possibly even a business decision. And you named 10 steps. I mean, there's a reason why you tell all the people, take a deep breath. To a small company, it seems a lot. Like you have to appoint a person, or it might be much better if it's a team. You're going to be paying quite a lot to monitor the data, to make audits, to keep track, to constantly comply with everything requested. So at the end of the day, I mean, this is nevertheless a business decision that you have to make. You have to invest your time and energy and possibly even funds so that you are compliant with all the GDPR requirements. And to me, that's like, okay, the underneath question, is this regulation friendly to the small companies, or is it really being written for Google, for Yahoo, for all these big companies, but it's not being considerate to the small ones?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think for one criticism of GDPR and privacy regulations is that it lumps everyone into the same category, and that it places the same obligations on everyone in the same category. For me, that's a huge issue or problem I have with the way that these data protection laws have been drafted. Because you're right, many small companies, family-owned businesses and stuff like that, to comply with these things or to put these kinds of things in place, it's a lot. It's a cost financially, a cost in terms of resources and everything like that. So it really is a cost. And the way these laws have been written, it lumps everybody in the same format. So if there's one criticism I have of these types of laws is that uh, it needs to take a different approach and have a more, if you say, tiered approach to organizations based exactly on where you are and on how you operate. Because I think one, privacy is important. And I think to any organization that touches on personal data needs to at least be compliant. But I don't think the law should be so onerous that it places unreasonable expectations on companies. And I think we've seen that with GDPR. GDPR only came out, I think, in May 2018. So we're about 2 years into GDPR, and still there are a lot of organizations within the EU space that aren't GDPR compliant. A lot of them are SMEs, small and medium enterprises, because again, to get these systems in place, it's hard. And my personal pet peeve, obviously, that we have a lot of these IT companies that come on and say, well, listen, I can do your data protection for you. Just put everything in on this system that I have for you, and I'll be able to do it for you. Uh, those things are expensive. Those things are costly. Even in my own practice, I was trying to get some of those systems to be able to help my own clients, and those things cost a lot. And but two, it also takes away from the organizational training, people understanding. So I think there needs to be, for me, a tiered approach in terms of data protection based on the type of organization that you are.
It does make sense. Hey guys, anybody wants to ask questions? I mean, it's really a small group of people, and we know all about ourselves. Well, not all about ourselves, but we all know each other. Marina, we work together actually. We have Unlocked, and we consult companies for decentralized autonomous organizations, their business models, and a lot of times we actually go to the conference together when it comes to blockchain. Hey, Marina.
Yes, hi. This was a very nice presentation. So we are lawyers, and I was thinking a lot from this point of view. Sometimes we need laws because we need to ensure that some rights are protected, etc. How do you see different technologies developing that could actually ensure this protection of rights, like you were saying, by design, in a way that how the technology is designed, it's automatically protecting a right or privacy in this way? And I mean, is this possible in the future? I mean, we will still need lawyers, and we will still need people that are, thinking about legal protection. But I think that, or we could, at least a part of it could be automated, or could be reflected also in the tech part.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I should say from the onset, I myself, I am not a lawyer. So
That's even
although,
better.
although I'm surrounded by lawyers like Anya and Margaret all the time, so I've learned from them. But I think, tech, and that's where tech is going, and that we see a lot of these companies, privacy-based companies, springing up. Like two I know of, one is OneTrust, and one is Nimity. I think was bought over recently by another organization, and they help in terms of managing your data, your compliance. If somebody makes a data request, how do they help process the request? If it helps monitor your website to see where your weak points are and stuff like that. So I think technology is going to be advancing to do that. Or as Dr. Kavokian calls it, PETs, privacy enhancing technologies. But I think there's always going to be that need for compliance from a legal point of view, to know exactly what your legal rights are, both organizationally and both within for clients. I'll give an example. We all know, I think, under GDPR, there's the whole idea of the right to be forgotten, right? Or the right to delete data on you. But it's not so much an automatic right, is it? It's a right that it's contrived by the organization, by the business, and by what they use the data for, and also by what other laws govern them. So I'll give an example. client I'm working with right now, they are, although they're Caribbean, because of their status within the EU and being part of one of those countries in the EU, like extra territory, they're touched by GDPR. And so because they're touched by GDPR, a person came to them, I think it was last year or thereabouts, wanting to get all the data they had on them deleted, and right to be deleted, right to be forgotten, everything like that. But they had to deny the request. Why? Because they're also constrained by other laws. You see, privacy must also work with other laws. And I think the law, one of the main laws that they were constrained by was the anti-money laundering regulation, de facto regulations that deals with compliance and deals with your customer. And because of that constraint, they couldn't delete everything on the customer, although the person wanted it to happen. And GDPR says that there are certain things that the organization has to do their own due diligence in processing these things, because there are other laws that you may come against. And right now, there's a growing debate on laws like AML and financing terrorism laws and stuff like that, and how do they compete, or how do they mesh with GDPR in terms of you have a strict data retention timeline for GDPR, but then these laws says because of audit reasons or because of compliance reasons from other laws, I need to comply with these laws. So now you have to balance, all the different competing regulatory spaces that you're in to be able to ensure that you're here. And that IT can't do. That technology cannot do. That you'll definitely always need legal compliance or legal guidance and balancing those things.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. Does anybody else have any questions? Alexa, you have posted a link. Global Privacy Control launches Do Not Track is back. I know that there were a couple of exercises or examples when people were promising that you're going to have a widget on the browser, or you're going to be having that possibility to prevent people from tracking you, but they weren't really successful. And what is the article saying? That this is now happening again, but this time a bit more successful?
So this is happening, but similar to the type of widget built into your browser, but this is about being able to opt out of the sale of data, right? So instead of under the GDPR or even CCPA in the US or in California, usually you have to either find somewhere on the website to opt out of the sale of your data, or you have to email the company and say, hey, I want to opt out. And it's very, you have to do that for every company, and it's very confusing. So this is basically, like you said, like a widget. But what it would do is when you visit, it sends out browser signals. And when you visit a site, it will basically, send your preferences to whether you want to opt out to the sale of your information. But it's interesting because this is an instance of where technology is used to try to, work together with different privacy laws. But this specific initiative was backed by the Attorney General of California the other day. So a little bit more of that really serious endorsement, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, so just one example of how technology would be used to further these privacy goals. But
it is so absurd to me to some extent, and I really want to hear you guys what you think about that. But I have a feeling that because we have created this GDPR, and because there's so much awareness and so much messages going out to the public about how there's mismanagement of our data, and how bad actors are collecting our data, and how nobody knows how it's being not only collected and processed, but how it's being sold afterwards, or for what reasons people are also using them. I think that there's a lot of fear, prevailing fear that is going up exponentially. So the more we have these informations, the harder it becomes for all the companies to really do something well with the data. And I have a feeling that these backfired, and now we have these companies like the one that you just described that are actually enabling me to prevent people from collecting my information. But nobody really thinks about, okay, well, we can collect the information and we can actually do something really cool with it. It's not necessarily that once I gather all this information, I'm going to be abusing that information. There might be a lot of good stuff done. Let's say, for example, running a campaign for ecocide, or running a campaign for improvements in the environmental sector, which is underfunded and especially does not have so much marketing happening. There's a lot of good stuff happening that people just don't have the funding to invest into the marketing, and that might be actually a way to go. But we are now between two extremes. Either people are abusing my data, or I'm going to prevent everybody from actually collecting my data.
Right, but then you would have the choice, right? So an ideal sort of, I guess I'll call it a widget of this sort, would allow you to set preferences, right? So that you can pick and choose when you just have more control over it. So when you want to, you know, put your data to use for these companies, would you believe in their mission or you think your information, it's worthwhile to put it there, that's fine. But then, you know, I think it comes down to choice. But again, like most consumers or most users don't even really know how their information is used or that it's being used. So I think it also boils down to just like people being aware in the ways in which companies collect and use their information. Because if you don't know these things, then what difference does it make to you if you might hear that, oh, it's good to download one of these do not sell widgets because it protects your information, but you don't really know too much about what that even means or how much further it goes in that. So then you just think, oh, okay, people said this is good, so I'm going to do this. And then I guess it doesn't really lend to consumer understanding, but yeah. You might think, oh, this is a solution, let me like download this widget instead of actually understanding how it works. And then also what happens is if a company implements you know, like, or you just download the widget and you visit a company site for the first time since you downloaded this, it doesn't take into account all of the times before that you've interacted with the company before you download the widget, right? So people might not know that either. They might think, oh, great, I downloaded this thing now and I'm going here and I opted out. But it's like, no, if you've interacted with this company in the past, then they actually still have a lot of your stuff. So people might not even be aware of that because they're not, you know, again, they just really don't know the ways in which this information is collected and used. So it's definitely not a perfect solution, or even it might not even be a good solution. But yeah, I don't know.
I think to answer Alexa's concern about opting out. So recently I was going through a lot of emails and there were unnecessary marketing emails. So I decided to, you know, patiently devote like, let's say 1 hour of my time and opt out of a lot of marketing related emails. So like you mentioned, I think I also have faced the exact same issue that like when you as a consumer, you want to opt out, they say, okay, fine, you know, we are okay with you letting you go. And, you know, we are really sorry that you no longer will be using our services. I think this is inherently wrong because in most of the jurisdictions, there is, you know, the data protection law has still not come into the picture. But one of the best practices, which I think it's a consequence of GDPR or maybe CCPA, is that once you opt out, most of the companies which have really good practices, they tend to send an email saying that, okay, fine, dear consumer, you have been opted out. So that kind of gives you a confirmation that, okay, fine, we are respecting your rights and we are being GDPR compliant. I think this is one of my observations, but this practice is not followed by all the organizations. There are very few organizations which do that. And I think as a matter of future privacy best practices, it might be a very good idea to keep this in mind. If at all your client is a marketing company. Second, I think on a very general note, I want to say that recently there is this regulation which has come up on personal data and non-personal data in the EU. And I think it's very, very interesting. I haven't gone through it myself and I would love to like read about it once this session is over. I'm very curious to know how companies deal with this issue. And I'm sure, I mean, this question would come up. And I know for a fact that GDPR is only on personal data, but at certain points, they might also be getting non-personal data. And I want to basically know if anybody else has come across this issue.
Non-personal data in terms of using it together with what they have within the organization to make decisions or as part of the processing? Is that what we're trying to come at?
I'm not sure if this is the definition as per the regulation, but I don't know, honestly. I only know that there is this regulation on personal and non-personal data, and it came up like, I think this year or last year. And I think it will be very interesting to see how companies deal with this issue. Like, how do they bifurcate personal data and non-personal data? This is just a comment that I wanted to share.
It's really complicated, but also the problem is, if you have identifiable data, right, that's one thing, right? That's pretty straightforward, what could constitute that. But then if you have enough of unidentifiable data together, it becomes identifiable, right? So if you have enough pieces, let's say, of a puzzle where this might be anonymous, this might be anonymous, and then it comes together, then you no longer have this anonymous data set. It becomes identifiable. So that's also pretty much the problem. And yeah, it's not, like you said, it's not so clear cut. It's not, there's not a clear line between.
Yeah, I think I saw a study that was done by MIT, I think a couple of years back, I can't remember exactly how much years back, where they were looking at anonymized credit card purchases data. So nothing linked to a particular person per se, but because of the other data that they were able to extrapolate and get, they were based on either from 5 touch points or maybe 5 or 6 touch points, with a 90% accuracy, were able to tell who the person was that made the purchase and stuff like that. So again, it's data that you think may be anonymized or doesn't link to you in any way, form, or fashion. But because of the amount of data that's out there, and by data, I mean also metadata, data about data that comes in from behind that you don't necessarily see that you're given out. When you have an AI, I think allows for that to happen over the processing speed and the power that we have right now. They're able now to crush all that data together and analyze it so quickly that they're almost able, within 5 or 6 touch points of information, could literally identify you within 93% of the time. And that I think that is, for some people, could be very scary. You think you're anonymized and you're not.
Yeah, true. We are all leaving the digital footprint somewhere. I mean, look at us. We are having cameras on, and this is being recorded. This is probably going to be accessible and made viable on our platform. I mean, it's not going to be publicized, but parts, I mean, this is also a digital footprint that people can then put together. I wonder if that's actually one of the hard criticisms towards GDPR, and why people are saying that to some extent it's been a bit obsolete in the moment it's been put out and promulgated. Because, I mean, the way you just explained it now, if you congregate all the data that we're able to create, even if they are partially pseudonymized, or even if they don't really discover who the person is behind, once you put them all together, I mean, you create a puzzle and you create a whole picture about that person. So you don't even have to know exactly who we are talking about. It's enough to have all this data and to have the power to influence that person. And I think that Cambridge Analytica showed just how much power one can actually collect, even if I am not discovered with my name and surname. It's enough for them to really know that I'm one of the, how did they call it, decidables or permissibles? I can't recall them.
Yeah, I can't remember offhand, but yeah, I take the point. I think I actually saw, was it a week or so ago, someone discussing the whole GDPR, and they said something I didn't know, didn't know this exactly, but they said that GDPR was more or less based on something called FIPS, FIPPS, which I think is the information privacy principles that came out of the US, I think in 1960s, 1970s, thereabouts. So it's grounded in those principles there. And if you think about that holistically, that therefore is 1970s, that's 20th century. So it's still grounded in 20th century thinking, 20th century ideologies. So I think the philosophy of GDPR, although it's in this day and age, it's still grounded in a way of thinking that is not, at least for my mind, not viable anymore, because technology is always changing. I think when GDPR came out, that's when you saw the explosion of blockchain. People saying, well, already GDPR and blockchain, there's conflict between them. So I think we need to, for me personally, I think we need, I think I mentioned this in a talk I gave yesterday. We need to take privacy out of a geopolitical realm where you have the EU has their laws, the US will have their laws eventually with CCP and everything else. Each country has their own jurisdictional laws. Um, Based on the nuances of their particular country or what they want to do, because I know a growing movement is the whole idea of data sovereignty and keeping your data within the country and not get exploiting your data or sharing your data externally. And of course, that has consequences for people in innovation and all those different things. So I think we need to take it out of that political debate and move it more into a holistic worldwide debate as to how do we, see data, see personal data, how do we put things in place to be able to, one, give people choice, give people control over the way they utilize their data, but still allow organizations that do good. Because right now I think a lot of organizations are being heaped with the Facebooks and the Googles or on the Amazons and those guys, because we know the bad reputation they have. And everyone's getting, oh, you collect personal data, so you're like them. And everybody's being grouped in that classification. I think we need to move it away from that into a more different way of thinking. Whether it happens or not, I don't know, but I think this geopolitical way of this fight between the EU and the US that's happening right now, it has no good consequences in the end.
But then, Rishi, I mean, think about it. Right now, it seems as if it's political and the countries are actually having the final say. And what I heard in your talk as well was that it should be our responsibility. It should be up to us to decide whether I want to share that data or not. And to me, it's just like, nobody got time for that. I definitely don't want to be the one deciding for that. I actually want these data complexity being just like the horoscope. You tell me what I should do in the next 3 days. You should actually be telling me whether this is retrograde Mercury or whatever is happening there with my data. I shouldn't be the one making these decisions, because if I am the one, then this leads me back to what Alexa was saying about the informed decision-making process. I actually first need to collect enough information to really know whether that company is going to be, managing my data, a good way, or whether I'm going to have not really a return of investment, but just some sort of a tangible and valuable return from that company using my data. And a lot of times people are talking about the tokenization of data, just like you mentioned before, the blockchain, right? And putting everything in some sort of a token so that I can now manage it. But again, should I really be the one taking that decision, or should there be yet another intermediary that we present? Let's say a company like, I don't know, or an organization, but specifically with the purpose of just identifying what is the good data management and what is ethically accepted and what is not. And then they decide, okay, Anya wants that because she's dealing with all this stuff and she might actually be exposed to this data, and all the companies that want to give her some value should be dealing with this data. I think that might be.
Yeah, and that's why we're negotiating new normal. I think these are the conversations we need to be having now and moving away from the old way of thinking into new ways of thinking.
You know what? I feel like a lot of the things we're talking about right now, we're talking about giving consumers agency in this process. But when it comes to, all these privacy laws and getting compliant, we're concerned right now, or the conversation tends to be around the businesses, right? So right now, all of these companies that do like all the blockchain-based consumer management platforms and stuff, they're focused right on getting the companies compliant. But a lot of the times the actual consumer and the user gets left out of the conversation. So that's why it's pretty interesting today. We keep talking about, like us knowing and us being able to opt out in our rights under the GDPR, because I just feel like a lot of the time when I'm talking to people, when we say get compliant, we're just talking about the businesses on the businesses side. So it's pretty interesting.
Guys, I have to ask just before you go, and this is quite an incredible coincidence that just happened. So I got a message, a short message on my phone from the Ministry of Health. So the Ministry of Health literally has my telephone number. and they're telling me to download the app that is going to be tracking my location, so that we, stay healthy and so that we prevent the spread of the coronavirus. So I have to ask you, what is your stance? What is your viewpoint on these tracking applications?
Can I just add something?
Please do.
So that ministry sent a message to everyone today. And I think that might even be a good thing. The problem in this case is that they have done all the other things wrong. And they think that the technology will help them and will save us from the new COVID wave. And I think this is exactly the things that are happening in really like complex problems. You are not addressing the things that you should address, but you think that somehow using a magic app will solve everything. Yeah, that's my take on the whole app thing, because people that are developing apps, they know exactly how much users you can get from an app like this, how to engage them, how to do marketing, how to even communicate about the app, and how to, how to onboard them. It like all the states would need to be, really good startups, communicators, in order to convince us to use it actually. And again, I think it might help, but with all the other measures that should be in place.
And interestingly enough, I listened to on YouTube, was it 2 nights ago, an interesting discussion by a guy called Bruce Schneider. And if you ever heard of Bruce Schneider, but Bruce Schneider is like one of the top leading cryptologists, IT guys, gurus, talks about security and IT security and different things and privacy. And the discussion was actually on this topic of the app. And his thinking was that, it's more surveillance based as opposed to anything else. Obviously, his questions were, well, once the pandemic is over, it's probably going to be over anyhow, we take it. It's not going to continue forever. What happens to that data afterwards? Who's going to be using that data? Do you know what they're going to be using the data for? And then Dr. Kevorkian mentioned that also in her talk this morning, where she talked about this whole idea of tracking and using technology to be able to do that and not knowing exactly what the data is. And she actually advocated, right or wrong, your choice obviously to decide, but she was actually advocating the partnership between Apple and Google. I think Apple and Google came together and formed a partnership. And I think she actually consulted or was consulted as part of that design process for location. And that Apple and Google and whatever they've designed is that they're not collecting any data or any tracking data or any geolocation data on it. And what they do is they notify you that you were around somebody for a particular point of time, whatever the length of time is. I think that you were around somebody who tested positive for COVID-19, and that's all they tell you. And the choice is yours as to what you want to do. Do I not want to go get tested? Do I not want to, self-isolate for 14 days, whatever? But I think, at least from what she said, it doesn't collect any geolocation data. It doesn't, the Bluetooth tokens change every half an hour and stuff like that. So it's a lot more privacy enhancing. But these other third-party vendors that are providing these tracking apps have other ulterior motives in the back of their minds. A good way to get, that email list or that list that you want to be able to market to afterwards.
Can I get a quick feedback on this one? Because hello, good evening, everyone. I just keep listening on the conversation. I don't know if you are aware, but it's on YouTube. One of the reporters did an experiment on smartphones regarding like how does it collecting data and what else. And what they tested on like the smartphone, I think on the first time it was like on, so GPS data, everything was on, and after they get like after the experiment, they get get to the conclusion, it gives your data away even if it's on or didn't do any kind of like social media activity or any kind of activity on your phone. It's just like collecting your data. The other was which was like more interesting, and this is like regarding for what you said, is when the smartphone was off. So even the smartphone was off, it somehow like collected data and get connected to satellites or whatsoever. I think it's like every like half an hour or like an hour then. So even if the phone on or off, it doesn't really matter. And like it is good like Google and which was the other one? Amazon? Not Amazon.
Apple.
Apple, sorry, yeah. Google and Apple is doing this partnership and whatsoever, but on it you has to be like how could I say, you have to be very conscious about this one, because they might advertise, yeah, we are the good guys, but like what the data gives away or what people see in it, it might be a slight different issue.
Yeah, and I agree. I think in the YouTube chat with Bob Schneider, he said one of the problems is that the technology doesn't know, for example, say, for example, it says if you're 6 feet or 8 feet apart, but
Mm.
how does it differentiate if I'm in a hotel room? I think was the example he used. So I'm in a hotel room and there's a wall between me and the other room and the other person, but we're 6 feet apart virtually, but obviously the app or the whatever it is can detect if we're 6 feet apart standing together, or there's a big wall between us. But it dings and says, okay, that person has COVID, so you were infected by somebody in COVID. But you were self-protected, self-isolated. The technology doesn't know that. I think one of the things that he mentioned in his discussion was it still doesn't take away from the good old-fashioned way of personal physical contact tracing in terms of calling people and getting proper listing. I mean, we all agree it's important to know who was exposed, who wasn't exposed. If I was exposed to someone who had COVID-19, but technology still doesn't offer that or solve the solution. But there are other means that you can use. The in-person, again, the health ministries going out and doing their normal physical contact tracing. But that also has its liabilities, because here in Trinidad, for example, where I live, the Ministry of Health came out very clear and said, well, because we don't have an app. So we don't have an app in Trinidad, but they're doing contact tracing through people by asking them questions. And unfortunately, they're saying people lie. They don't tell the truth, So again, for me, it's imperfect whether you have an app or whether it's you're doing in-person contact tracing. So they each have their pros and their cons one way or the other. But I take the point that, I mean, although Google and Apple say they're doing this for public good, we need to take that with a pinch of salt when they hear public good especially from Google and Apple.
This kind of brings you back to the social points. Just like China has been incentivizing people to actually provide data so that they can obtain the credit or financial funding. And it really is all about the incentivization when you think about it. I mean, I would gladly provide the data if I know that I'll be compensated or that there's going to be some sort of a reputation gain behind it. But then again, I mean, if it can be abused and I'm being compensated just on a short term and then on the long term, somebody can just mess around with my voting or with the political decisions, then, again, you're like, yeah, maybe not even that social credit score is going to be good enough. There is another conversation happening in the chat. Alexa, Marina, do you guys want to share something more?
Oh no, I think I was just saying that the manual contact tracing is so hard because especially if you're not like following social distancing protocols and you're going all around town, it's like, how will you possibly even be able to recall who you've interacted with, But it's a whole other story, I guess.
Yeah, it's a good question. I was also surprised how the airports are working these days. Because they kind of force you that you go with a new visa. Yeah, Michael, we were talking about Singapore with Nisha. She's actually talking tomorrow, so come and join. She was part of the GCPR because we started the GCPR project because we kind of wanted to collect all the policy responses. Among them were a couple of responses with regard to the privacy issues as well. But yeah, we would have to go into the Tableau and actually do the search ourselves. And she was having a presentation, one of the spotlights on Singapore. She was telling us how well the government actually tackled the whole thing. They had incredibly well design information sharing. So the government was basically having a WhatsApp for numerous groups. They were having Telegram groups, and through those groups, they were sharing the information about when the curfew, for example, ends, or what's the status with a new infection rate. A lot of information that was useful directly to the citizens. So I was really positively surprised how well that was done. And then they had a governmental website that also provided you with basically all the information that you needed with regards to when I can go out, or when the schools are going to be open and stuff like that. Because among a lot of other things, we were constantly talking just about how the laws and the rules are being presented to the public. And in time of crisis, I mean, governments sometimes did not know how to approach these things, and rules were literally created on an hourly basis. So governments really struggled with, what is the best medium to provide people with that information. And sometimes they would actually go and promulgate a law over the TV in some cases, or over Twitter. And it's insane once you think about it, but Singapore really had it well done. And she was telling us that just when we had a consultation call for her speaking position, she told us that since we last spoke, which is a couple of months ago, Singapore actually went from having an app for all the citizens towards providing every citizen with a device, because the app was not downloaded uh, so many times, and they still wanted to trace everybody, and now everybody's obliged to kind of have that device with them. And we were also having some talks, Marina, about having this application on a mandatory basis, and then one way to avoid the whole thing would be that, my telephone is too old and I cannot download the app. So that might be an argument good enough for the government, but then if everybody would say that, it might be, again, resulting in such a thing that they would just distribute me with a device that would be able to track me down or something.
Yeah, I'm in Singapore actually, so I can tell you the whole situation as well.
Please do, share.
I'll tell you, like in the beginning, yeah, we did, because one is that this is not the first time China cover up all these things. We actually have another ally there, which is Taiwan. Taiwan was already like doing something like that, but I think the first mistake we made, I think there's a few mistakes made, but I'll just say the mistakes first. One is that we listened to the WHO at that time, who we know has China has some influence over. So the miscommunication was there. It's already there in the beginning. That's why US was pissed at the WHO at that time. That is the first part. Secondly was, yes, locally the population, the infection rate was pretty low, but on the migrant side, it exploded. And it's because the working conditions for the migrants were quite bad. So that's why there was a time where it goes up really quickly to about 10,000, and then it go down again. It's because most of the cases is not from the locals, it's actually from the migrants themselves. Though thirdly is because I think it's political. Because they do it so well in the beginning, they try to use that as a way to boost the credibility of the government. So they started to focus more into like political facade over medical protocols and doing it right. So that's why people were a bit upset. But overall, we actually get some things right. So for one is that we recognize that the population is really well literate in the IT side, and saying everyone do in some ways, even the elderly has a smartphone. So we use a contract tracing app to actually keep track. But there's a reason why most people are not willing to adopt. Singaporeans are not stupid. They know that the government is not 100% democratic. So there is some, I should say, persecution of journalistic freedom and of people who talk against. So people are kind of afraid of relinquishing such personal data to the government, because they are afraid that the government will know what they are doing, or whatever negative perception they have of them. And also because it was during election time, this was our election year, so people are very unhappy with the government over some of the policies it's made. It's a long story. Yeah, but this year was their worst performance. So naturally, when the government said we hope you download the app or whatever machines, we are a bit freaked out, because we are afraid of being tracked. So yeah. But overall, we did you know, we did pay attention to all this. I mean, we did do. I mean, I think the good thing is that having the internet and you know having a very strong education background do help us to understand the disease. And you know, I mean, we have been through like three or four pandemics. I mean, we have the SARS, we have H1N1, the Zika virus, and this one. So this is like we kind of already like know what to do. It's just that this virus is a much more dangerous one compared to last time, and we had to make even lifestyle changes to it. Yeah, but for work, I should say that the good thing is that because we are so adapted to using new technologies, it's not very difficult to go over. But it's just that what happened is that some work cannot be done. Some of the works that we cannot do at home, we have to go in the office. So what happened is that we do two shifts, especially for the schools. So one shift is usually for 1 week, and then the next shift was for the other week, and so on. And there's always this safe distancing policy. Plus, the government do provide free masks using machinery. So in a way, it reduce the infection rate even further. So I think that's also another thing. Maybe universal healthcare is not possible, but at least some basic infrastructure or some necessity is needed, like masks and disinfectant and so on.
Very true. I know that we only have 2 more minutes, so does anybody have any final remarks before we say bye-bye for today? There's going to be a talk that Nisha Rahu is going to be providing to us tomorrow. I don't know the timing though, but there's a schedule coming out your way. So
It's 5 p.m. CET.
that's why Alexa. Oh my God. Okay, perfect. So 5 p.m. CET, or better said CEST. We are being very mindful of the summertime in Central Europe. So 5 p.m.
Oh yeah, I always forget that.
We had a lot of troubles with the time zones. There's CET, CEST, BST, and GMT. So lots of abbreviations, and this is going to be switching at the end of October, and not all of the countries are actually switching. So any final remarks, guys?
No, I hope that, I mean, I want to thank Anya and the team, Alexa, and of course the presenter Rishi for giving insightful presentation on privacy. I think those 10 points just blew my mind. And right now with legal tech in picture, most of the things are being automated. But again, if for the future DPOs, data protection officers, would anyways have to know the law. They would anyways have to get acquainted with the new kinds of laws which are coming all over the world. So yeah, in short, I want to thank Rishi for this awesome presentation, and Anya and the team for Alexa for putting this together. Thank you so much.
Wow, Saswati, you actually took the words out of my mouth. So yeah, thank you, Rishi. Thank you, everybody, actually, for providing with such a nice discussion. Michael, Tamas, Saswati, Marina, and Alexa, and Ruben, thank you for the tech. We'll see you all tomorrow.